The red warning light flashed across every screen in New Terra Colony as the alien message came through. Dr. Helen Morrison looked up from her workbench where she had been fixing a broken communication device. The sound that filled the air was not human, it was deep and harsh, like metal scraping against stone. Governor Pete Collins ran into the communication center with sweat on his face. He had been in a meeting about crop production when his assistant told him about the incoming transmission. Now he stood next to Helen as they both watched the large screen fill with an image that made their blood turn cold. The creature on the screen was tall and thin with skin that looked like dark leather. Its eyes were black and had no warmth in them. When it spoke, sharp teeth showed in its mouth. This was Admiral Crickstall of the Zephyrian Empire, though Helen and Pete did not know his name yet. "People of the planet you call New Terra," the alien said in perfect human language, "I am speaking for the Zephyrian Empire. We have watched your world for many cycles. You have built something that we cannot allow to exist." Helen felt her heart beat faster. She knew what the alien was talking about. Her quantum communication device sat quietly on the workbench behind her. It could send messages instantly across any distance in space. She had worked on it for 5 years and had just made it work properly last month. "Your species has created a form of communication that threatens the order of the galaxy," Admiral Crickstall continued. "This technology must not spread to other worlds, therefore, we give you this choice. Surrender your technology and your freedom to the Empire, or face complete destruction." Pete grabbed Helen's arm. His hands were shaking. Around them, other colonists had gathered to hear the message. Children held onto their parents. Old people sat down in chairs because their legs felt weak. "You have 72 hours to decide," the Admiral said. "If you choose to fight, know this. I command 300 warships. Each ship carries weapons that can turn your cities to dust. I have destroyed 14 worlds that refuse to join the Empire. Your small colony will not be the 15th to survive my visit." The transmission ended and the screen went black. The room filled with the sound of people crying and talking in scared voices. Some colonists ran to find their families. Others just stood and stared at the empty screen. Pete turned to face the crowd. He was their leader and they looked to him for answers, but he felt as lost as everyone else. New Terra was a peaceful colony of 50,000 people. They had no army and no warships. Their only weapons were a few old plasma guns that miners used to break rocks. "Everyone stay calm," Pete said, though his own voice was not steady. "Need to think about this carefully. Go to your homes and stay with your families. Do not try to leave the planet. We will figure out what to do." As the crowd slowly left, Helen remained by her workbench. She picked up the quantum communicator and held it in her hands. It was no bigger than a book and weighed less than a bag of flour. The smooth metal surface felt warm to her touch. This small device had taken years to build, and now it might cause the death of everyone she cared about. "How did they know about your machine?" Pete asked her. Helen shook her head. "I only tested it 3 times. I sent messages to the research station on Kepler Station. Maybe they detected the quantum signals somehow." Pete sat down in a chair next to her workbench. He looked older than his 50 years. Being a colony governor was supposed to be about organizing farming schedules and fixing water pipes. It was not supposed to be about deciding whether to surrender to alien empires or watch everyone die. "What exactly does your communicator do that scares them so much?" he asked. Helen set the device back on the bench. "It uses quantum entanglement to send information instantly across space. Normal radio signals take years to travel between star systems. My device can send a message to any point in the galaxy and it arrives immediately." "That sounds useful, but why would an empire be afraid of it?" Helen thought about this question. She had spent so much time working on the technical problems that she had not considered the bigger picture. Maybe they control other species by keeping them from talking to each other. If everyone could communicate instantly, it would be harder to control them. Outside the research building, they could hear people calling to each other as they hurried home. Some colonists were loading their belongings onto transport ships, hoping to escape before the alien fleet arrived. But Helen knew there was nowhere to run. The Zephyrian Empire controlled 17 star systems. Even if some people escaped New Terra, the aliens would find them eventually. Pete stood up and walked to the window. In the distance he could see the lights of the main settlement where most of the colonists lived. Children were probably going to bed right now, not knowing that alien warships were coming to destroy their world. 72 hours, he said quietly. Helen nodded. That was not much time to find a miracle. The emergency council meeting started at dawn the next day. Pete Collins had not slept at all during the night. He sat at the head of the long table in the colony's main building, looking at the faces of the people who helped him run New Terra. Everyone looked tired and scared. Captain Jake Turner was the first to speak. He was in charge of the colony's small security force, though calling it a security force was being generous. Jake had 12 men and women who usually dealt with mining accidents and helped find lost hikers. I have counted our weapons, Jake said, reading from a paper tablet. We have 12 plasma cannons that are 20 years old. They were made for mining, not fighting. We have 6 transport ships that could carry about 30 people each. The ships have no weapons and their shields are meant to protect against space rocks, not enemy fire. Jake put down his tablet and looked directly at Pete. Governor, we cannot fight 300 warships. If we try, we will all be dead in 10 minutes. Helen sat quietly at the other end of the table. She had brought her quantum communicator with her, though she was not sure why. The device sat in front of her like a small metal book. During the night, she had taken it apart and put it back together 3 times, trying to think of some way it could help them. What about evacuation? Asked Dr. Bob Stevens, who ran the colony's medical center. Can we get people off the planet before the aliens arrive? Jake shook his head. Our transport ships can carry maybe 200 people total. We have 50,000 colonists. Even if we had enough ships, where would we go? The aliens control 17 star systems. They would find us. The room fell quiet. Helen could hear the sound of children playing outside the building. Life was going on as normal for most of the colonists. Parents were still sending their kids to school and people were still going to work. They were trying to act like everything was fine, but everyone knew it was not. There might be another way, Helen said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She picked up the quantum communicator and held it so they could all see it. Instead of fighting the Zephyrian fleet, what if we fought the Zephyrian Empire itself? Captain Jake frowned. I do not understand. How can we fight an empire that controls 17 star systems? Helen took a deep breath. The idea had come to her during the long night, but it seemed crazy even to her. The empire controls other species by keeping them separated. They cannot talk to each other, so they cannot work together. But what if they could all communicate instantly? She set the communicator on the table and pointed to it. This device can send messages across the galaxy immediately. Right now, it can only talk to one receiver at a time, but if I modify it, I might be able to send the same message to thousands of different places at once. What kind of message? Pete asked. The plans for building quantum communicators, complete instructions that any advanced species could follow. If I broadcast the information to every inhabited world in the galaxy, they could all build their own devices. Dr. Stevens shook his head. How would that help us? The alien fleet will still be here in 48 hours. Helen leaned forward. Think about what would happen if every species in the galaxy could suddenly talk to each other. Species that the Empire claims are dead or primitive could announce that they are still alive. Worlds that are under Imperial control could coordinate resistance movements. The Empire's power comes from keeping everyone isolated and afraid. Jake was still frowning. This sounds like science fiction, Helen. We need real weapons, not crazy theories about galactic communication. But Ben Carter, Helen's young assistant, was nodding his head. He was only 25 years old and had just finished his engineering degree before coming to New Terra. It could work, he said. I have been studying the Empire's history. Every time they conquer a world, the first thing they do is destroy all long-range communication equipment. They want to make sure conquered species cannot call for help. Helen felt a spark of hope. At least one person understood her idea. Ben is right. The Empire's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. They have made themselves the only source of communication between star systems. If we break that monopoly, their control starts to fall apart. Pete rubbed his tired eyes. As governor, he had to make the final decision, and every choice seemed impossible. Even if your idea works, Helen, it would take time, weeks or months for other species to build communicators and organize resistance. We need something that helps us right now. Maybe we do not need to survive, Helen said quietly. Maybe we just need to make sure the galaxy survives. The room went very quiet. Helen realized she had just suggested that they sacrifice themselves to save others. It was not an easy thing to hear. Let me understand this correctly, Pete said slowly. You want to modify your communicator to broadcast building instructions across the galaxy. This will probably destroy the device and might not even work. Even if it does work, it will not save New Terra from the alien fleet. Helen nodded. That is correct, but it might save the galaxy from the Zephyrian Empire. I think it could. Yes. Captain Jake stood up from his chair. This is insane. We are talking about giving up without a fight. What about our families? What about the children? Ben Carter spoke up again. Captain, we are going to lose our families and children anyway. The alien fleet is too strong. But if Helen's plan works, at least their deaths will mean something. We could free thousands of other worlds. Pete looked around the table at each person. These were not soldiers or politicians. They were farmers and doctors and engineers who had come to New Terra to build a better life. Now they had to decide whether to die fighting or die trying to save strangers they would never meet. How long would it take to modify the communicator? Pete asked. Helen thought carefully. If Ben helps me, maybe 18 hours. We would need to overload the quantum field generators and route all available power through the transmission array. It is dangerous work, and the device will definitely be destroyed. Will it hurt anyone when it overloads? No, but we will lose all communication. With the outside galaxy, we will be completely cut off. Pete stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see colonists going about their morning routine. A group of children was walking to school, carrying their books and talking with each other. They deserved a chance to grow up, even if it was not on New Terra. Do it, he said. Helen Morrison had never worked so hard in her life. For 16 straight hours, she and Ben Carter had been taking apart her quantum communicator and rebuilding it into something completely different. Her hands were covered in small cuts from handling sharp metal pieces, and her eyes burned from staring at tiny electronic parts. The device no longer looked like the neat little machine she had spent 5 years perfecting. Now it was spread across 3 work tables, connected by thick power cables that snaked across the floor like metal snakes. Ben had wired it to every power source in the research building, including the emergency generators that were supposed to keep the lights on during storms. Hand me the quantum field amplifier, Helen said without looking up from her work. Ben passed her a device that looked like a crystal wrapped in copper wire. Helen carefully connected it to the main transmission array, being very careful not to touch the wrong wires. One mistake could cause the whole system to explode instead of sending their message. Outside the building, they could hear the sounds of the colony preparing for the end. Some families were trying to leave on the transport ships, even though there was nowhere safe to go. Others were gathering in the community center to pray together. A few people were working frantically to hide important records and scientific data, hoping that someday other humans might find New Terra and learn what had happened. The quantum entanglement matrix is ready, Ben said, wiping sweat from his face. But I am worried about the power surge. When we activate this, it is going to draw more electricity than the fusion reactor usually produces in a month. Helen nodded. She knew the risks. In the best case, their modified communicator would broadcast her message across the galaxy and then burn out safely. In the worst case, the power surge could destroy half the research building and kill anyone nearby. We need to test the encoding system one more time, she said. Helen sat down at her computer and opened the file that contained their message to the galaxy. It was not a long message, but it was the most important thing she had ever written. The file contained complete instructions for building quantum communicators, written in simple language that any advanced species could understand. She had included detailed diagrams, parts, lists, and step-by-step assembly guides. But the technical information was only part of the message. Helen had also written a letter explaining why she was sharing this technology freely with everyone. She talked about the importance of free communication and the right of all species to talk with each other across the stars. She explained that knowledge should belong to everyone, not just powerful empires. The translation matrix is working, Ben said, checking his computer screen. The quantum field will automatically translate our message into every major language. In the galaxy, even species we have never met will be able to read it. Helen saved the file and connected her computer to the modified communicator. In just 2 hours, Admiral Crixtal's deadline would arrive. Zephyrian scout ships had already been detected at the edge of their solar system. Watching and waiting for the main fleet, Governor Pete Collins entered the research building along with Captain Jake Turner and Dr. Bob Stevens. They had come to witness the transmission that might save the galaxy, even if it could not save New Terra. Are you ready? Pete asked. Helen looked at her life's work, now transformed into something she barely recognized. As ready as we can be. Once I start the transmission, there is no way to stop it. The device will run for about 10 minutes and then destroy itself. Will anyone actually receive the message? Captain Jake asked. He still thought the whole plan was crazy, but he had agreed to support it. Ben checked his calculations one more time. Based on our power output and the quantum field strength, we should reach approximately 43,000 inhabited worlds. Some might not have the technology to build communicators immediately, but others could start construction within days. Helen sat down at the control station and placed her hands on the activation controls. Through the window she could see the first signs of dawn breaking over New Terra's main settlement. It would probably be the last sunrise these buildings would ever see. "I want everyone to stand back," she said. "When I overload the quantum field, there might be some dangerous energy discharge." The others moved to the far side of the room, but Ben remained next to Helen. "I am staying here," he said. "If something goes wrong, you might need help." Helen smiled at her young assistant. "Thank you, Ben, for everything." She took a deep breath and pressed the activation button. The quantum communicator came alive with a sound like thunder mixed with music. The crystal components began to glow with bright blue light, and the air around the device started to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Every light in the building flickered as the machine drew enormous amounts of power from the colony's electrical grid. Helen watched her computer screen as the transmission began. The quantum field was reaching out across the galaxy, carrying her message to world after world. She could see status reports scrolling past as the signal found receivers on distant planets. Message received by Altair Station. Ben read from his monitor. Transmission confirmed at Wolf 359. Signal detected at Proxima Centauri. The list kept growing. Hundreds of worlds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Species that Helen had never heard of were receiving her gift of quantum communication technology. Some were acknowledging receipt immediately, which meant they already had the scientific knowledge to understand what they had received. "Warning," Ben called out. "Power surge is increasing beyond safe levels." Helen could see sparks beginning to jump between the metal components of her machine. The crystal amplifiers were glowing so brightly that she had to squint to look at them, but the transmission was still going strong, reaching more and more worlds every second. 40,000 worlds and counting, Ben reported. The sound of the machine was getting louder and more chaotic. Some of the power cables were smoking, and Helen could smell burning insulation, but she refused to shut down the transmission. This was humanity's one chance to change the galaxy. 43,000 worlds. Ben shouted over the noise. "Helen, we need to shut it down." "Not yet," she replied. "Give it 30 more seconds." The quantum communicator was shaking violently now, and pieces of metal were starting to break off and fly across the room. Through the chaos, Helen could hear her computer announcing successful transmissions to world after world. 45,000 worlds, Ben called out. "Helen, the whole thing is going to explode. Shut it down," Governor Pete yelled from across the room. Helen reached for the power switch. But before she could touch it, the quantum communicator made one final, enormous surge. The blue light became so bright that everyone in the room had to close their eyes. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, the machine went silent. When Helen opened her eyes, her quantum communicator was gone. In its place was a pile of twisted metal and broken crystals. Smoke filled the air, and small fires burned on several of the work tables, but the computer screen still showed the final transmission count. 45,612 worlds had received humanity's gift. Across the galaxy, the revolution had begun. Admiral Crystal stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his fleet of 300 warships move toward the small human colony. The operation should have been simple. His ships would surround the planet, demand surrender, and then either accept submission or turn the world to ash. He had done this same routine 14 times before with other stubborn species. But something was wrong. His communication officers kept reporting strange signals coming from all across the galaxy. Species that had been silent for decades were suddenly broadcasting on frequencies that should have been impossible for them to access. Admiral called his chief communications officer, a thin Zephyrian named Velcourt. "I am receiving transmission requests from over 200 different star systems. Many of these are from species we reported as extinct or primitive." Crystal moved to the communication station and looked at the display screen. The list of incoming signals was scrolling too fast to read. Names of species and worlds that he had not heard from in years were lighting up the board like festival decorations. "Show me the transmission from the Altarian Republic," he ordered. The main screen filled with the image of a blue-skinned humanoid creature. Crystal recognized the species. The Altarians had been conquered 30 years ago, and their government had been dissolved. They were supposed to be scattered across a dozen prison worlds, broken and helpless. "Greetings, Admiral Crystal," the Altarian said with a smile that showed no fear. "We understand you are currently threatening the human colony of New Terra. We wanted you to know that the Altarian Republic has been reformed. Our ships are moving to protect our allies." The transmission ended before Crystal could respond. He stared at the empty screen, trying to understand what he had just heard. The Altarian Republic had no ships. Their entire fleet had been destroyed. During the conquest, how could they be protecting anyone? Sir Velcourt called out. I have similar messages from the Crystalline Collective, the Aquatic Federation, and something called the Free Worlds Alliance. They are all claiming to have military forces and threatening retaliation if we attack the human colony. Crystal felt something he had not experienced in many years. Uncertainty. These species were supposed to be under Imperial control or completely destroyed. None of them should have been able to communicate with each other, let alone coordinate military responses. How are they talking to each other? He demanded. Our monitoring stations should detect any long-range communications between conquered worlds. His intelligence officer, Commander Zektar, was frantically checking reports on his computer. Admiral, it appears that every species in the galaxy has suddenly acquired quantum communication technology. They are using quantum entanglement fields that our sensors cannot detect or block. That is impossible. Quantum communication requires advanced scientific knowledge and rare materials. These primitive species do not have access to such technology. The evidence suggests otherwise, sir. I am also receiving reports from our garrison forces on occupied worlds. They are reporting coordinated uprisings on 17 different planets. The local populations seem to be receiving tactical support and coordination from outside sources. Crystal walked to the main viewing screen and looked out at the stars. Somewhere among those points of light, the carefully constructed order of the galaxy was falling apart. The Zephyrian Empire had maintained control for 200 years by keeping conquered species isolated and unable to communicate with potential allies. Now that isolation had been shattered in a single day. Show me the transmission records from the human colony, he ordered. The communication officer brought up the data from their sensors. Approximately 6 hours ago, we detected a massive quantum energy surge from the planet's surface. The signal was unlike anything in our databases. It appears to have been a broadcast transmission sent simultaneously to thousands of different locations. What was in the transmission? We were not able to intercept the actual message, Admiral. Quantum entanglement communication cannot be monitored by outside observers. But based on what is happening across the galaxy, we believe the humans transmitted the complete technical specifications for quantum communication technology. Crystal sat down heavily in his command chair. In his long military career he had faced enemy fleets, desperate last stands, and even rebellion on his own ships. But he had never faced anything like this. The humans had not tried to fight his fleet. Instead, they had destroyed the foundation of Imperial power itself. Admiral, Commander Zektar said urgently. I am receiving a priority message from the homeworld. The main screen showed the pale, angular face of Supreme Commander Lennox, the highest military authority in the Zephyrian Empire. Behind him, Crystal could see emergency lighting and the controlled chaos of a crisis command center. Admiral Crystal, you are to abandon your current mission immediately and return to Imperial space with all available ships. We are under coordinated attack from multiple species acting in perfect coordination. Every garrison world is reporting simultaneous uprisings. Our supply convoys are being attacked by ships from species we thought we had destroyed. Crystal leaned forward in his chair. Supreme Commander, how is this possible? These species had no way to coordinate attacks across multiple star systems. They do now, Kellenox replied grimly. Somehow, every advanced species in the galaxy has gained access to quantum communication technology. They are sharing tactical information, coordinating military strikes, and even providing each other with technical support. The Empire is fighting 40 different wars at the same time. The transmission showed star charts with red indicators spreading across Imperial territory like a disease. Worlds that had been securely under Zephyrian control for decades were suddenly declaring independence and joining something called the Galactic Democratic Alliance. What are your orders, Supreme Commander? Bring your fleet home immediately. We need every ship to defend the core worlds. The conquest of one primitive human colony is no longer important when the entire empire is under threat. The transmission ended, leaving Crystal alone with his thoughts. Through the viewing screen, he could see New Terra in the distance. A small blue and green world that should have been easy to destroy. Instead, that tiny planet had somehow managed to bring down the greatest empire in galactic history. His tactical officer approached carefully. Admiral, what are your orders? Crystal stood up and looked one more time at the human colony. 300 warships against 50,000 defenseless colonists should have been a simple execution. Instead, It had become the moment when his empire began to fall. "Set course for the homeworld," he said quietly. "Maximum speed." As his fleet turned away from New Terra, Crystal could see new signals appearing on his communication board. Species after species was announcing their freedom from imperial rule. The galaxy that had been silent and isolated for 2 centuries was suddenly alive with voices talking to each other across the vast distances between stars. The humans had sent an idea into the darkness, and that idea had become a revolution that no army could stop. Commander Lisa Stone had been visiting the Centauri research station when the quantum transmission reached their computers. She was a human diplomat who specialized in first contact protocols. Though her job had been mostly theoretical since humans rarely met other intelligent species, now she found herself at the center of the most important diplomatic event in galactic history. The research station's communication center was chaos. Scientists and technicians were working frantically to build quantum communicators based on the plans they had received from New Terra. Meanwhile, messages were pouring in from species across the galaxy, all wanting to talk to each other after decades or centuries of forced silence. Commander Stone called Dr. Alan Parker, the station's chief scientist. "We have successful contact with the hegemony of free worlds. They want to speak with a human representative immediately." Lisa hurried to the main communication terminal, where a large screen showed the face of an alien creature unlike anything she had ever seen. It had gray skin, large eyes, and a mouth that seemed to smile in a way that was almost human. "Greetings, Commander Stone. I am Minister Colvin of the hegemony of free worlds. We have waited a very long time to speak with your species again." Lisa was confused. "Again? Have our species met before?" "Oh yes," Minister Colvin replied. 70 years ago, human explorers made contact with several of our member worlds. We were beginning to establish trade and cultural exchange when the Zephyrian Empire attacked. They destroyed our quantum communication network and told us that humanity had been wiped out. We have mourned your loss for 7 decades. The revelation hit Lisa like a physical blow. Humanity had not been alone in the galaxy. They had allies and trading partners that the Empire had cut them off from. "Minister, how many species were in contact with humans before the Empire interfered?" 43 different species across 22 star systems. We had formed what we called the Peaceful Contact Alliance. Your people brought us new ideas about democracy and individual rights that influenced our entire civilization. Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes. Humanity had been part of a galactic community, and they had never known what they had lost. The Zephyrian Empire had not just conquered worlds, they had stolen the friendships and partnerships that could have existed between species. "Commander," Dr. Parker called from another workstation. "I have the Crystalline Collective on Communication Link 7. They are requesting immediate coordination for joint military operations." Lisa moved to that terminal and found herself looking at a being made of what appeared to be living crystal. The creature's body reflected light in beautiful patterns as it spoke. "Human Commander, we are Chardonnel of the Crystalline Collective. Our quantum communicators are now operational. We wish to coordinate our military forces with yours for operations against Zephyrian Imperial targets." "I appreciate the offer," Lisa said carefully, "but humanity does not have military forces in this region of space. Our colony on New Terra has no warships." The crystal being seemed to shimmer with what might have been amusement. "Commander, you underestimate the power of what your species has accomplished. By sharing quantum communication technology freely with all species, you have given us something more valuable than any weapon. You have given us unity." Lisa was about to ask what the creature meant when Dr. Parker called out again. "Commander, I am receiving a priority transmission from something called the Galactic Democratic Alliance. They say they need to speak with you immediately about military coordination." The main screen switched to show a conference room filled with representatives from dozens of different species. Lisa recognized some from human databases, but many were completely unknown. At the head of the table sat an elderly creature with blue skin and kind eyes. "Commander Stone, I am Premier Yolta of the newly reformed Galactic Democratic Alliance. We have unanimous agreement from our member species to offer you the position of emergency coordinator for joint operations against the Zephyrian Empire." Lisa stared at the screen in disbelief. "Premier, I am honored, but I am just one human diplomat. I have no military experience or authority to coordinate galactic operations." "Commander," said another voice from the conference table. This speaker was a tall, thin being with metallic skin. "You represent the species that broke the Empire's control over galactic communication. Your people sacrificed their own safety to give freedom to 45,000 worlds. Every species in this alliance trusts humanity to act in the best interests of all. Premier Yolta leaned forward. Commander, the Empire's power came from keeping us isolated and afraid. They conquered us one species at a time because we could not call for help or coordinate our defenses. Now, for the first time in 2 centuries, every free species in the galaxy can talk to each other instantly. Lisa looked around the communication center at the dozens of active channels connecting New Terra's research station to worlds across the galaxy. Scientists were sharing technological information, military leaders were coordinating defense plans, diplomats were establishing new alliances and trade agreements. In just a few hours, the galaxy had transformed from a collection of isolated, conquered worlds into a connected community. "What would you need me to do?" she asked. "Help us coordinate our response," Premier Yolta replied. "The Empire is already recalling ships from their outer territories. Garrison forces on occupied worlds are reporting uprisings that they cannot control because the local populations are receiving tactical support from off-world allies. We have a chance to liberate every world under Imperial control, but only if we work together." Dr. Parker handed Lisa a data tablet, showing real-time updates from across the galaxy. The information was overwhelming. 17 worlds had declared independence from the Empire in the last 4 hours. Military forces from dozens of species were moving to support liberation movements on occupied planets. Most importantly, Imperial supply lines were being disrupted by coordinated attacks that the Empire could not predict or prevent. The Aquatic Federation has sent their entire fleet to support the liberation of the water worlds in the Kepler system, Dr. Parker reported. The avian clans are providing air support for ground operations on 7 different planets. Even species we thought were extinct are contributing to the effort. Lisa made her decision. "Premier Yolta, I accept the position of emergency coordinator. What is our first priority?" The blue-skinned premier smiled. "Commander, our first priority is to ensure that no other species suffers the isolation that we have endured. We are establishing permanent quantum communication networks between all member worlds. Every species will have the ability to call for help if they are threatened. And our second priority, to finish what your colony started. The Empire maintained control through fear and isolation. Now that every species can communicate freely, the Empire cannot control anyone. We are going to liberate every world under Imperial occupation and establish a new galactic government based on cooperation instead of conquest." Lisa looked at the faces on the screen, representing species from across the galaxy. Some were humanoid, others were completely alien, but all of them shared the same expression of hope and determination. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was united in a common cause. "How long do you estimate this will take?" she asked. The metallic-skinned speaker answered, "Commander, the Empire is already collapsing. When species can coordinate their resistance efforts, Imperial control becomes impossible to maintain. We estimate that organized Imperial resistance will end within 6 months." Lisa smiled. Helen Morrison's quantum communicator had done more than send a message across the galaxy. It had awakened 45,000 worlds and reminded them that they did not have to face the universe alone. Dr. Helen Morrison stood in what used to be her laboratory, now converted into a meeting hall where representatives from across the galaxy gathered to discuss the future. 6 months had passed since she sent her quantum transmission, and the transformation of the galaxy was almost impossible to believe. The burned remains of her original quantum communicator had been carefully preserved, and now sat in a place of honor at the center of the room. A small plaque next to it read the device that changed everything in 47 different languages. Helen sometimes stared at the twisted metal and broken crystals, amazed that something so small had brought down the greatest empire in galactic history. Governor Pete Collins, now serving as New Terra's ambassador to the Galactic Council, walked over to where Helen was standing by the large window that looked out over the colony's main settlement. The view had changed dramatically in recent months. Where once there had been only human buildings, now there were structures built by dozens of different species who had come to visit the world that started the revolution. "The Crystalline Collective just finished installing their quantum relay station," Pete said, pointing to a tower made of what looked like living glass. "They say it will boost our communication range by 300%. Helen nodded. New Terra had become the unofficial capital of the new Galactic Democratic Union, though she sometimes wondered if their small colony was ready for such responsibility. Representatives from hundreds of species visited regularly, wanting to see the place where galactic freedom began. "Any word from the War Crimes Tribunal?" she asked. Pete's expression grew serious. Admiral Crickstal was found guilty on all charges. The judges were unanimous. He will spend the rest of his life helping to rebuild the worlds he destroyed. The former emperor abdicated last week rather than face trial. Helen was glad that the worst of the Zephyrian leadership would face justice, but she took no pleasure in anyone's suffering. Even the Empire's leaders were ultimately victims of a system that valued conquest over cooperation. The new galactic government was focused on rehabilitation rather than revenge. Ben Carter appeared at Helen's side, carrying a data tablet that showed the latest communication network statistics. Her former assistant was now the chief technical coordinator for the Galactic Quantum Communication Project, a job that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. Helen, you need to see this, Ben said excitedly. We just passed 100,000 active quantum communicators across the galaxy. Every major world now has instant communication with every other world. The isolation that the Empire used to maintain control is completely gone. Helen smiled at Ben's enthusiasm. At 25, he was young enough to adapt quickly to the new reality where humans worked alongside dozens of alien species. She sometimes felt overwhelmed by how fast everything was changing, but Ben seemed to thrive in the chaos. What about the species that were thought to be extinct? She asked. 43 different civilizations that the Empire claimed to have destroyed have re-established contact, Ben replied. It turns out the Empire usually just destroyed their governments and communication systems, then told everyone the species was dead. Most of the populations survived on hidden colonies or as refugees on other worlds. The revelation that so many species had survived Imperial conquest was one of the most hopeful discoveries of the past months. The galaxy was far more diverse and populated than anyone had realized. The Empire had maintained control partly by convincing everyone that resistance was useless because so many others had already been defeated. Commander Lisa Stone entered the meeting hall, having just returned from the Galactic Council sessions on Centauri Prime. As emergency coordinator, she had spent most of the past 6 months traveling between worlds, helping to organize the new democratic government. She looked tired but happy. How did the vote go? Pete asked. Lisa smiled broadly. The Galactic Communication Accord passed unanimously. Every member species has agreed that quantum communication technology will be freely shared with all civilizations. No species will ever again be cut off from the galactic community. Helen felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The principle that had driven her to share her technology with the entire galaxy was now enshrined as the fundamental law of the new government. Information and communication belonged to everyone, not just the powerful. There is something else, Lisa continued. The Council has officially named the principle behind our revolution. They are calling it the Morrison Principle. The idea that freely shared knowledge makes everyone stronger than hoarded power makes anyone. Helen blushed at the honor. She had never wanted fame or recognition. All she had wanted was to prevent the Zephyrian Empire from using her technology to hurt people. But if her name could help remind future generations about the importance of free communication, she was honored to be remembered that way. Dr. Bob Stevens, who had served on the Emergency Council during those desperate hours 6 months ago, joined their group by the window. I just received the final casualty reports from the liberation campaigns, he said. Total deaths across all military operations, fewer than 10,000 beings. Most Imperial forces surrendered once they realized their home government had collapsed. The number was remarkably low for a galactic war, but it was still too high for Helen's liking. Every death represented someone's family member, friend, or loved one. But she had to admit that the alternative would have been much worse. If the Empire had been allowed to continue, millions more beings would have died in future conquests. The Aquatic Federation wants to establish a permanent embassy here on New Terra, Lisa said. So do the Crystalline Collective, the Avian clans, and about 30 other species. This little colony is becoming quite important. Helen looked out the window at the bustling settlement that had once been a quiet farming community. Alien children played with human children in the streets. Scientists from dozens of species worked together in laboratories that had been built in the past few months. Merchants traded goods and ideas in markets that sold everything from Altarian art to Zephyrian technological components. I never imagined anything like this when I was building my communicator, Helen said quietly. Ben laughed. Helen, you changed the galaxy with an idea that is more powerful than any weapon or any army. Pete nodded in agreement. The Zephyrians sent 300 warships to destroy us. We sent one idea and liberated 45,000 worlds. As the afternoon turned to evening, More representatives arrived for the daily communication sessions with other worlds. The meeting hall filled with beings of every imaginable shape and size, all working together to build a better galaxy. They spoke dozens of different languages, but quantum communication devices translated everything instantly, ensuring that no one was left out of the conversation. Helen watched the bustle of activity and thought about the night 6 months ago when she had sat alone with her quantum communicator, trying to figure out how to save her colony. She had never expected that her desperate plan would lead to galactic revolution and the end of the greatest empire in known history. But perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful changes came not from grand military campaigns or political movements, but from simple acts of sharing and cooperation. The Zephyrian Empire had controlled the galaxy through fear, isolation, and the hoarding of information. Humanity had defeated them by doing the exact opposite. As the first stars became visible through the meeting hall windows, Helen smiled at the thought that somewhere among those points of light, thousands of species were talking to each other across the vast distances of space. No one would ever again have to face the universe alone. The revolution was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Building a galaxy based on cooperation instead of conquest would take time, patience, and the continued willingness to share knowledge freely with all who needed it. Helen Morrison, the quiet scientist who had once worked alone in a small laboratory, had helped to ensure that no one would ever have to work alone again.